Nathaniel Foster sat at the head of the massive mahogany dining table in his penthouse on Park Avenue, cutting a piece of roasted beef with slow, deliberate precision. The apartment was impeccably designed, with floor-to-ceiling glass windows, sleek Italian furnishings, and priceless abstract paintings, yet it felt hauntingly empty. At 42, as the sole heir to one of the most prestigious luxury hotel chains in Manhattan, he possessed immense wealth. Yet he lacked the one thing that truly mattered: someone to share the profound silence that had chased him since childhood. Deaf since the age of 7, after a severe bout of scarlet fever, Nathaniel had learned early on that the fast-paced world had little patience for anyone who did not fit the mold. Former girlfriends had grown exhausted by the need to repeat themselves. Business associates often bypassed him for phone conferences, and even his own relatives seemed visibly uncomfortable in his presence. Consequently, he had retreated into a fortress of solitude, discarding his hearing aids in public, skipping high-profile charity galas, and embracing a quiet, untouchable existence. But on a chilly Thursday evening in late autumn, that carefully constructed isolation was about to fracture in a way he could never have anticipated. He glanced up from his plate and caught a sudden flash of movement near the doorway of the service pantry, something small, bright, and utterly out of place. Nathaniel blinked in disbelief, assuming his eyes were playing tricks on him after a long day of reviewing architectural blueprints and corporate balance sheets. Children did not belong in this sterile, echoing sanctuary of wealth. Yet, standing right there in the grand dining room was a little girl with curly blonde hair and oversized red sneakers, clutching a faded pink lunchbox and staring at him with wide, fearless, inquisitive eyes. Nathaniel remained frozen in his seat, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. The little girl took a few tentative steps forward, broke into a wide, gap-toothed grin, and began speaking rapidly, her words entirely lost to him because his hearing aids were resting safely on the mahogany sideboard. She gestured toward her lunchbox, then toward his towering plate of food, her small hands moving with an animated, expressive rhythm. A strange, unfamiliar warmth blossomed in the center of Nathaniel's chest, accompanied by a sharp pang of vulnerability he had not felt in decades. Before he could process the situation, the heavy service door swung open abruptly, revealing Eleanor Moretti, one of the part-time cleaning professionals, her face drained of all color. "Chloe! Oh, my goodness! I am so sorry, Mr. Foster." Eleanor stammered, her voice frantic as she rushed across the pristine marble flooring and grabbed the 4-year-old by her small hand. The after-school daycare center had an emergency closure today, and I had nowhere else to leave her. I told her to stay quietly in the pantry, but she slipped away. I swear I am so terribly sorry. I will clean this up and take her home immediately. Eleanor was speaking far too fast for Nathaniel to read her lips properly, but the sheer panic in her wide, haunted eyes translated universally. He saw the stark terror of a hard-working mother facing the immediate loss of her livelihood, terrified that a single mistake would push her over the edge of financial ruin. Nathaniel looked back down at little Chloe, who did not look frightened in the slightest. Instead, the child waved cheerfully with her free hand and formed a clumsy little heart shape in the air with her chubby fingers. A heavy lump formed in Nathaniel's throat, reminding him of his own lonely childhood and the desperate need for unconditional belonging. Eleanor was already tugging at the little girl's arm, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Come along, Chloe. Mr. Foster is trying to eat his dinner in peace. We cannot be a burden to anyone." Oh. But before Eleanor could pull her daughter away, Nathaniel raised his right hand in a calm, deliberate gesture to signal them to halt. Eleanor froze instantly, her posture rigid, bracing herself for the inevitable reprimand, the cold dismissal, or perhaps even a call to building security. Instead, Nathaniel reached into the tailored pocket of his charcoal trousers, retrieved his sleek digital hearing aid, and slipped it securely behind his ear. The world rushed back in with a sudden, overwhelming wave of sound. The low, steady hum of the central air conditioning system, the hurried, ragged breathing of a terrified mother, and finally, the bright musical voice of 4-year-old Chloe, asking a question that cut straight through the armor of his guarded heart. "Mister, are you eating all by yourself?" the little girl asked innocently, tilting her head to the side as she studied his solitary place, setting at the massive table. Nathaniel swallowed hard, struggling to find his voice after hours of absolute silence. It had been years since anyone had asked him a question born of pure, uncalculated curiosity rather than professional obligation. He looked down at the empty chairs surrounding him, then back at the little girl, and for the first time in his adult life, Nathaniel Foster chose brutal honesty over self-protection. "Yes, I am," he answered, his voice raspy from disuse, carrying the heavy weight of a man unaccustomed to confessing his own vulnerability. Chloe beamed as if she had just solved the most complicated mathematical equation in the world, her eyes sparkling with absolute delight. "Can I eat dinner with you then? I brought my own sandwich." Eleanor's face flushed bright crimson, mortification washing over her as she tightened her grip on her daughter's shoulder. "Mr. Foster, please, pay her no mind. She has no filters. I will escort her out right this second, and we will be completely out of your hair." Nathaniel shook his head slowly, his gaze shifting from the frantic mother to the eager, expectant child. He gestured toward the plush velvet dining chair directly to his right beside his own. "She said she was hungry," Nathaniel said softly, a subtle shift warming his tone. "Let her stay and eat with me." Eleanor's knees trembled so violently she feared she might collapse right there on the imported wool rug. In the 2 years she had cleaned the Foster penthouse 3 afternoons a week, she had never once seen the enigmatic billionaire smile, let alone invite an uninvited guest to share his meal. To the entire domestic staff, Mr. Foster was known as a glacier, distant, impeccably polite, but utterly unreachable, living behind an invisible wall of wealth and silence. "I brought her own little meal in her box, sir. She can eat out in the service kitchen if you prefer," Eleanor offered desperately, trying one last time to salvage her professional boundaries. But Nathaniel ignored her suggestion entirely, fixing his gaze on the young mother with a piercing, observant stare. "What is your name again?" he asked abruptly, surprising even himself. Eleanor blinked in utter astonishment, clutching her cleaning cloth tighter against her apron. My name is Eleanor Moretti, sir." He repeated the name quietly under his breath, testing the cadence of the sound on his tongue, as if committing it to memory for the very first time. "How long have you been working here, Eleanor?" "2 years, Mr. Foster." Nathaniel fell silent for a long moment, studying her worn, modest gray cleaning uniform, her hair pulled back into a practical, no-nonsense bun, and her hands, calloused and dry from harsh detergents and endless scrubbing. She looked precisely like what she was, a tired, hard-working mother carrying the immense financial and emotional burden of raising a child entirely on her own in one of the most expensive cities in the world. 2 years, Nathaniel murmured, a flicker of genuine regret crossing his features. "And I never once asked you your name." Hearing the subtle remorse in his voice, Eleanor felt her chest tighten painfully. She recognized that particular brand of sadness, having stared into the mirror and seen it reflected in her own eyes during her darkest, loneliest nights. Before Eleanor could formulate a diplomatic reply, Chloe, having zero patience for adult pleasantries, tugged firmly on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, the nice mister said I can stay. Look, my chair is so big and high up." Without waiting for further permission, the little girl scrambled onto the upholstered seat, her short legs dangling happily in the air as she began inspecting the heavy silverware with wide-eyed fascination. Defeated by her daughter's unstoppable enthusiasm and disarmed by Nathaniel's uncharacteristic gentleness, Eleanor finally relented with a soft, trembling sigh. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the room. "I will finish scrubbing the kitchen floors, and if she causes any trouble at all, just ring the service bell and I will come running." Eleanor retreated into the adjoining kitchen, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could not afford to lose this position. The hourly wage she earned here was the solitary lifeline keeping her small, cramped apartment afloat in Queens, covering the skyrocketing rent, grocery bills, and Chloe's preschool tuition. Yet, despite her underlying anxiety, a strange, magnetic curiosity drew her back toward the doorway just a few minutes later. Peering quietly into the grand dining room, Eleanor froze in absolute shock at the scene unfolding before her. Nathaniel was leaning forward in his seat, actively engaged in conversation with the little girl, holding his digital hearing aid firmly in place as he listened to every word she uttered. Chloe was chattering away about her favorite picture books, her preschool teacher, and a stray cat she had seen outside that morning, punctuating her breathless stories with dramatic hand gestures. Nathaniel was actually smiling, a genuine, unguarded expression that completely transformed his handsome face, softening the sharp angles of his jaw and bringing a bright, warm light to his gray eyes. No one had ever looked at Chloe with such undivided, patient attention. Most people in the bustling metropolis simply dismissed her as too loud, too energetic, or too much of a handful for a polite environment. Yet here was the most formidable corporate titan in Manhattan, hanging on to a 4-year-old's whimsical tales as if they were the most important secrets in the universe. In the kitchen, Eleanor leaned back against the cool marble countertop, pressing her palms flat against the surface as a wave of profound emotion washed over her. 15 minutes later, when she returned to the dining area to collect her daughter, Chloe loudly protested the departure, crossing her tiny arms and forming a stubborn pout. "Oh, please, Mommy. The mister was just telling me about his big dog when he was a little boy." Eleanor looked apologetically at her employer, expecting him to look annoyed by the interruption. Instead, Nathaniel looked almost disappointed as well. "If you don't mind, Eleanor," he said quietly, his voice carrying a gentle hesitation, "she is welcome to stay a little longer while you finish up your duties." Hesitating for a brief second, Eleanor looked into his eyes and realized with startling clarity that Nathaniel was not doing her a favor. Rather, he was desperately drinking in the warmth, noise, and unfiltered human connection that his cold, cavernous penthouse had lacked for decades. Ooh. In the days that followed, Nathaniel found his thoughts drifting toward Thursdays with an eager anticipation that felt entirely foreign to him. Though Eleanor strictly kept to her cleaning schedule and never brought Chloe back inside the dining room, Nathaniel frequently found excuses to walk through the hallways during her shifts, hoping for a brief glimpse of the little girl or a fleeting exchange with her mother. Julia Seraphin, his fiercely loyal executive secretary of 5 years, noticed the subtle transformation in her boss almost immediately during a Tuesday morning review of quarterly hotel acquisitions. "Mr. Foster, Are you feeling quite all right today? Julia asked, pausing mid-sentence as she organized a stack of legal contracts across his expansive glass desk. Nathaniel looked up from his computer monitor, blinking slightly as if waking from a long, peaceful sleep. Yes, Julia. Perfectly fine. Why do you ask? Julia offered a knowing, gentle smile, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. Well, sir, you simply seem different lately. More present, perhaps more engaged with the regional managers. Nathaniel stared at her for a second, knowing she was entirely right. Ever since that unexpected Thursday evening, the heavy shroud of isolation that had blanketed his daily existence had begun to lift, replaced by a restless, vibrant energy he could neither explain nor suppress. I suppose I am just sleeping better, he lied smoothly. Though Julia's skeptical raised eyebrow clearly indicated she wasn't buying it. She simply nodded, placed the final folder on his desk, and retreated quietly, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Despite his best efforts to return to his rigid, predictable routine, waking at dawn, arriving at his Park Avenue corner office by 8 o'clock, reviewing corporate metrics, and returning to a silent home, nothing felt quite sufficient anymore. The penthouse felt too quiet, the mahogany table too vast, and the lingering memory of Chloe's infectious laughter echoed through the empty rooms like a haunting melody. The following Thursday afternoon, Nathaniel was working from his home office when he distinctly heard the high-pitched, musical giggle of a child echoing from the formal living area. His heart leaped into his throat. He pushed his chair back with such sudden force that it nearly tipped over backward, rushing down the hallway to find the source of the sound. There sat Chloe, cross-legged on the plush white Persian rug, furiously coloring with a box of crayons on large sheets of paper Eleanor must have salvaged from the supply closet. "Chloe?" Nathaniel whispered, his voice carrying an involuntary note of pure relief as he stepped into the room. The little girl looked up instantly, her face breaking into a radiant sunshine smile. "Mr. Quiet Man, you are home." Nathaniel couldn't help the broad grin that spread across his own face as he walked over to join her on the floor. "I am indeed. What are you up to, artist?" Chloe proudly held up a sheet of paper, covered in enthusiastic, chaotic scribbles, featuring a lopsided stick figure standing beside an enormous, misshapen red heart. "I drew a picture of you, so you won't be lonely when I'm not here," she announced proudly, handing the colorful masterpiece to him with both hands. Nathaniel accepted the paper with infinite care, as if it were a priceless Renaissance painting, deeply moved by the gesture. "Thank you, Chloe. This is truly wonderful." Before he could say anything more, Eleanor rushed into the room from the master hallway, her face flushed with utter mortification and panic. "Mr. Foster, I am so sorry." "I just stepped away to change the linens in the guest suite for 10 minutes, and she wandered right back in. I will pack our things right now and—" "Eleanor, please stop," Nathaniel interrupted gently, standing up to face her with a calm, reassuring demeanor. "She isn't disturbing me in the least. In fact, I am very glad she is here." Eleanor stopped dead in her tracks, clutching her cleaning supplies as her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths. "Sir, I appreciate your incredible kindness. Truly I do. But I cannot let my personal life bleed into my professional responsibilities. My daughter is a handful, and people of your status don't usually—" "People of my status," Nathaniel interjected firmly, stepping a little closer, "rarely know what actually matters in life, Eleanor. Please let her stay while you finish your work. Her presence is a welcome change to these four walls." Eleanor looked from Nathaniel's earnest, unreadable expression down to her beaming daughter, who was already tugging at Nathaniel's trousers to show him another crayon drawing. A heavy, protective warmth swelled inside Eleanor's chest, mingling with a deeper, more dangerous feeling she refused to name aloud. She knew, with every fiber of her being, that crossing this invisible line between employer and employee was a perilous gamble, yet walking away felt increasingly impossible. As Eleanor returned to her chores, cleaning the master bathroom with mechanical precision, her mind raced with a turbulent storm of thoughts. She knew that men like Nathaniel Foster inhabited a completely different universe, a rarefied stratosphere of wealth, power, and high society where a struggling single mother from Queens had no permanent place. Yet, every time she witnessed the gentle, patient way he interacted with her daughter, a quiet voice whispered that perhaps genuine human kindness transcended social class. Later that evening, after Eleanor and Chloe had finally packed their belongings and headed out into the chilly autumn night, Nathaniel stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his living room, watching the distant headlights stream down the avenue. On the refrigerator, securely fastened with a heavy magnetic clip, hung Chloe's lopsided drawing of the stick figure and the giant heart. He reached out, gently tracing the waxy surface with his fingertips, feeling a profound surge of hope unfurl within his chest. The distinct, beautiful realization that he might never have to endure the crushing weight of absolute silence again. Meanwhile, Henrique Foster sat behind the massive oak desk in his executive suite at the Midtown headquarters of the family's hotel empire, fuming in silence. As Nathaniel's older brother and the senior vice president of operations, Henrique had always shouldered the heavy burdens of the corporation, making the ruthless business decisions and keeping the enterprise stable, while Nathaniel hid behind his deafness and retreated into his own silent world. But over the past month, Henrique had sensed a deeply unsettling shift in the corporate dynamic. Nathaniel was suddenly attending executive board meetings with renewed vigor, offering sharp, strategic insights and showing an alert, vibrant engagement that deeply threatened Henrique's absolute control. Change equaled vulnerability, and vulnerability was entirely unacceptable in the cutthroat hospitality industry. Julia. Henrique snapped sharply as his secretary walked into his office with a stack of financial portfolios on Tuesday morning. "What on earth is going on with my brother lately?" Julia paused, her expression instantly freezing into a mask of professional neutrality. "I am not quite sure what you mean, Mr. Foster." "Don't play games with me, Julia. You've managed his office for 5 years. You know his habits better than anyone. He's been leaving the office early on Thursdays. He's distracted during strategic reviews, and he has this infuriating, relaxed confidence about him that he hasn't possessed in a decade. Who is he seeing?" Julia swallowed hard, fiercely protective of her employer, yet acutely aware that lying to the senior vice president was a dangerous game. "Mr. Foster simply seems to be spending more time attending to personal matters at home," she replied carefully, choosing her words with extreme caution. "At home? Alone?" Henrique pressed, leaning forward across the desk with narrowed eyes. "I couldn't possibly comment on his private life, sir." Knowing he wouldn't get a straight answer from Julia, Henrique took matters into his own hands. That very afternoon, he contacted the head of security for the luxury residential building where Nathaniel's penthouse was located, demanding a full report on any unusual visitors entering his brother's private residence. Within 24 hours, the building supervisor discreetly confirmed Enrique's worst suspicions. A cleaning woman, Eleanor Moretti, and her young daughter had been visiting the penthouse with alarming frequency, frequently staying well into the evening hours, and sharing dinner with the reclusive billionaire. Enrique's blood ran ice-cold. The fury rising within his chest felt like liquid fire. A common cleaning laborer infiltrating his family's inner sanctum, breaking every foundational rule of social distance and professional propriety that the Foster dynasty had meticulously upheld for generations, was beyond tolerable. Without a second thought, Enrique stormed out of his corporate office, grabbed his car keys, and drove straight to the Park Avenue penthouse, determined to put an immediate stop to the madness before it permanently tarnished the family name. When he forcefully pushed open the unlocked service door of the penthouse, having obtained a master key from building management under the guise of an urgent family emergency, he found Eleanor and Nathaniel standing side by side in the expansive gourmet kitchen, casually talking while Chloe colored at the granite island. The three of them were laughing softly at some private joke, an image of domestic harmony that made Henrique's stomach turn. "Nathaniel!" Henrique's voice cut through the warm atmosphere like a jagged blade of ice. All three turned instantly. Nathaniel's relaxed expression vanished in a microsecond, replaced by a cold, defensive glare. "Henrique, what the hell are you doing here?" Henrique strode into the kitchen without invitation, his designer overcoat flapping behind him as he cast a scathing, deeply contemptuous look toward Eleanor. "I came here to see with my own eyes if the rumors were true," Enrique spat, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "So it really is true. You are hosting the cleaning staff for intimate family dinners in our family's flagship residence." Eleanor turned deathly pale, shrinking backward as if she had been physically struck, instinctively pulling Chloe behind the protective shelter of her skirt. "Mr. Foster, please, I can leave right this second." "Yes, you certainly can," Enrique roared, pointing a rigid finger toward the entryway. "Get your things and get out of this building immediately." "Stop it, Enrique!" Nathaniel shouted, stepping squarely between his brother and Eleanor, his voice echoing fiercely through the vaulted ceilings. "You have no right to speak to her like that in my home." "She is an employee, Nathaniel," Enrique fired back, his face darkening with absolute disgust. "Employees do not dine with the owners. They don't bring their children to colonize our private spaces. Can't you see what she's doing? She's a penniless single mother exploiting your known vulnerabilities, manipulating your loneliness to secure financial favors and social elevation." "That is a vicious lie," Eleanor cried out, hot tears streaming down her pale cheeks as humiliation burned through her veins. "I have never asked him for a single cent. I have never wanted anything from him except an honest day's work." "Quiet!" Enrique snapped coldly, refusing to even look her in the eye. "Clever women in your position don't have to ask directly, do they? They play the victim card. They parade their children in front of lonely, isolated men. And before you know it, they've sunk their claws deep into a multi-million-dollar fortune." Nathaniel's fists clenched so tightly, his knuckles turned stark white. The fury raging inside him eclipsed years of practiced restraint. "Get out," Nathaniel whispered, his voice dangerously low, vibrating with an intensity that made even Enrique momentarily hesitate. "You know nothing about her. You know nothing about me. And you certainly have no authority to dictate who I welcome into my life. If you cannot respect the people I care about, then you are the one who needs to leave this apartment right now." A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the kitchen. Enrique stared at his younger brother with a mixture of sheer disbelief and profound betrayal, realizing with sudden clarity that the timid, compliant Nathaniel he had dominated for decades was entirely gone. Without another word, Enrique turned on his heel and stormed out of the penthouse, slamming the heavy oak door behind him with a thunderous crash that rattled the glass fixtures. After Enrique's explosive departure, the penthouse felt heavy and oppressive, suffocated by an invisible cloud of lingering tension. Chloe had stopped coloring altogether, clinging tightly to her mother's waist, with large, frightened tears welling in her innocent eyes. Nathaniel stood motionless in the center of the kitchen, his chest heaving as he tried to bring his racing pulse under control. "Eleanor, I am so deeply sorry," Nathaniel began, his voice laced with profound anguish. "My brother had absolutely no right to speak to you that way. He is arrogant, controlling, and—" "He was right, Mr. Foster," Eleanor interrupted softly, her voice trembling as she wiped the stray tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. "He was right about the boundaries, about the optics, about the fundamental reality of who we are. I am just a cleaning worker, and you are a multimillionaire heir. If people find out about this, it will destroy your reputation in the corporate world." Nathaniel took an urgent step forward, closing the distance between them with fierce determination. "I don't care about the corporate world, Eleanor. I care about you. I care about Chloe. You brought warmth back into this cold, dead tomb of a home when I had completely given up on human connection. Do you really think I am willing to let you walk away just to satisfy my brother's archaic social rules?" Eleanor looked up into his intense gray eyes, seeing a raw, unfiltered devotion that terrified and seduced her all at once. "It isn't just about social rules, Nathaniel," she whispered, using his first name for the very first time. "It is about survival. If I lose this job because of workplace scandal, I have nowhere to go. I cannot afford to be someone else's collateral damage, and I certainly cannot let my daughter grow up surrounded by this kind of hostility and conflict." Chloe looked up from her mother's side, her lower lip trembling slightly as she looked between the two adults. "Please, don't fight," the little girl pleaded softly, her tiny voice cutting straight through their complicated adult fears. "Friends don't yell at each other." Nathaniel knelt down on one knee so he was eye-level with the little girl, offering a tender, reassuring smile despite the heavy turmoil in his own heart. "We aren't fighting, sweetheart. We are just trying to figure things out. Your mother is very brave, and I am just very stubborn." Chloe wiped her nose with her sleeve and offered a small, tentative smile. "My mommy says stubborn people just need a big hug to fix their brains." Nathaniel let out a genuine, rumbling laugh, a sound so light and free that it surprised even himself, and pulled the little girl into a brief, warm embrace before standing back up to face Eleanor. The air between them shifted, charged with an undeniable electric intimacy that neither of them could ignore any longer. "We keep going, Eleanor," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice filled with a resolute conviction. "We don't let my brother, the board of directors, or anyone else dictate what is real. We face whatever comes next, together." Eleanor stared at him for a long, agonizing moment, weighing the immense risks against the fragile, beautiful promise of a future she had never dared to dream of. Finally, a soft, tearful smile broke through her stoic defense, and she let out a breath she felt she had been holding for years. "You are entirely out of your mind, Nathaniel Foster," she murmured softly. "I know," he replied, taking her rough, hard-working hand in his own smooth palm, feeling the perfect fit of their fingers intertwined. "And for the first time in my life, I wouldn't have it any other way." True to his ominous warning, Enrique Foster did not let the matter rest. Over the following 2 weeks, he launched a systematic, aggressive campaign to sever the bond between his brother and the single mother from Queens. First, he attempted to terminate Eleanor's contract through the building's commercial cleaning agency under the flimsy pretext of budget restructuring. But Nathaniel intercepted the paperwork within hours and personally renewed her contract with a substantial pay raise directly through his private accounts. Frustrated by that failure, Enrique escalated his tactics, calling an emergency meeting of the corporate board of directors at the luxury hotel chain's Midtown headquarters. Under the official guise of addressing executive conduct and corporate governance, Enrique formally summoned Nathaniel, the family's senior legal counsel, Dr. Alvaro Castillo, and 3 senior regional directors to the mahogany-paneled boardroom. The tension in the room was palpable before a single word was spoken. Everyone around the polished conference table knew the hidden agenda. "Let us dispense with corporate pleasantries," Enrique began coldly, fixing his younger brother with an unyielding glare from the head of the table. "We are here today to address a severe, escalating breach of professional ethics and personal conduct on the part of our president, Nathaniel Foster. Your recent, highly inappropriate personal entanglement with a domestic staff member is placing the reputation, stability, and public standing of our entire corporate brand at grave risk." Nathaniel crossed his arms over his tailored chest, leaning back in his leather chair with icy composure. "I am not involved in any entanglement, Enrique. Eleanor Moretti is a valued, hard-working member of the service team, and my personal life is entirely my own prerogative. It ceases to be private the moment it threatens the stability of a billion-dollar enterprise." Enrique countered sharply, slamming his palm flat against the mahogany table. "If the financial press gets wind of the hotel heir dallying with a cleaning woman in his penthouse, the tabloids will have a field day portraying us as exploitative elitists, wielding our corporate power over vulnerable, low-income laborers." Dr. Alvaro Castillo cleared his throat nervously, adjusting his gold-rimmed spectacles as he looked toward Nathaniel. "With all due respect, Mr. Foster, your brother raises a valid legal concern. Public optics matter immensely in our industry, and a romantic or overly familiar relationship between an executive officer and a subordinate staff member invites severe regulatory scrutiny." "It is not a romantic scandal, Alvaro. It is a friendship," Nathaniel retorted, though his voice wavered slightly under the heavy, critical weight of the collective stares. "Then what is it, Nathaniel?" Enrique pressed mercilessly, leaning forward to close the psychological distance. "Why is she dining in your private residence every single week? Why are you restructuring your entire schedule around her shifts? Why are you behaving like a lovesick adolescent instead of the head of this company?" Nathaniel opened his mouth to reply, but the words caught in his throat. How could he possibly explain to a room full of cold, calculating corporate executives that Eleanor and Chloe had breathed life back into a man who had spent decades drifting through existence like a ghost? How could he articulate the profound healing power of a little girl, drawing stick figures and inventing sign language to bridge the silent chasm of his world? "Because I cared about them," Nathaniel answered finally, his voice ringing with a quiet, powerful conviction that silenced the murmurs around the table. "Because they bring joy, warmth, and genuine human connection into my life. Things this company and this family have systematically denied me for 42 years. They make me feel alive, and I refuse to apologize for that." A heavy, stunned silence descended upon the boardroom. The directors exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly processing Nathaniel's unprecedented emotional admission as a sign of mental instability. Only Henrique remained unfazed, his expression hardening into a mask of calculated ruthlessness. "You are deluding yourself, Nathaniel," Henrique said softly, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are clinging to a fantasy because you are chronically lonely and desperate for affection. But that woman doesn't love you for who you are. She loves the security, the financial stability, and the luxurious lifestyle you can provide for her and her illegitimate child." The words struck Nathaniel like a physical blow to the chest, echoing the deepest, darkest insecurities he had fought his entire life to keep buried. "You don't know her," Nathaniel whispered hoarsely. "And you do?" Henrique challenged, raising an eyebrow. "Are you really so blind that you cannot see you are merely a stepping stone out of poverty for her?" Nathaniel stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward against the wood-paneled wall, his eyes blazing with a fury that made even the seasoned corporate lawyers flinch. "Enough. I have listened to enough of your poison, Henrique. If you believe my personal happiness is a threat to your precious corporate empire, then let me make my position entirely clear. I choose my life, I choose my peace, and I choose them." Without waiting for a dismissal, Nathaniel turned on his heel and walked out of the boardroom, slamming the heavy glass doors behind him with a resonant finality that marked the absolute end of an era. Dodi. Late that same evening, the news of the board meeting's disastrous fallout reached Eleanor through a frantic phone call from Julia Seraphin, who warned her that Henrique was actively mobilizing the board to suspend Nathaniel from the presidency within the week. Realizing the devastating magnitude of the wreckage she was inadvertently causing, Eleanor made the most agonizing, heart-wrenching decision of her entire life. She could not and would not allow the man she had quietly grown to love to lose his life's work, his professional reputation, and his family dynasty simply because he had shown kindness to a struggling single mother and her daughter. Working through blinding tears in the quiet hours of midnight, Eleanor drafted a short, formal, and utterly devastating resignation letter on a piece of lined notebook paper. She explained that she could no longer remain the catalyst for his professional ruin, that he deserved a life unburdened by the heavy baggage of her struggles, and that she would always cherish the brief, beautiful moments they had shared. The following afternoon, while Nathaniel was away attending an emergency legal consultation with his private attorneys, Eleanor packed her modest belongings, took 4-year-old Chloe by the hand, and walked out of the Park Avenue penthouse for the very last time. When Nathaniel returned to the apartment 2 hours later, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him the moment he stepped into the silent, pristine foyer. He spotted the folded sheet of lined paper resting neatly in the exact center of the mahogany dining table. He read the words once, twice, 3 times, feeling his heart physically shatter with every single syllable. She had surrendered. She had walked away to protect him, choosing self-sacrifice over fighting for what they had built together. Panic surged through his veins with terrifying velocity. Grabbing his car keys from the counter, Nathaniel sprinted toward the private elevator, ignoring the building's security guard's startled calls as he rushed out into the bustling Manhattan traffic. He drove like a madman through the dense afternoon congestion, his mind screaming that he could not and would not survive losing them. He navigated the familiar streets of Queens, pulling his luxury sedan up alongside a row of faded, run-down brick apartment buildings with peeling paint and iron fire escapes. Racing up 3 flights of narrow, creaking concrete stairs, he slammed his fist repeatedly against the chipped wooden door of apartment 4B. The lock clicked open, and Eleanor stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock and red-rimmed from intense crying, as she stared up at the breathless, disheveled billionaire standing on her welcome mat. "Nathaniel, what on earth are you doing here?" she gasped, her voice trembling violently. "You cannot just throw everything away. You are going to lose your company, your position, your entire legacy because of me." Nathaniel stepped across the threshold, ignoring the cramped, humble surroundings entirely as he reached out and gently cupped her tear-stained face with both hands. "I don't care about the company, Eleanor," he pleaded, his voice cracking with raw, unfiltered emotion. "I don't care about the hotels, the money, or the title. The only legacy I care about is the one we build together. Please, don't ever walk away from me again. I need you. I need both of you." Eleanor shook her head, fresh tears spilling over her lashes as she tried to pull away. "You don't understand the guilt I would carry if you lost your entire world." "Then let me carry it with you," Nathaniel interrupted fiercely, pulling her gently against his chest, wrapping his arms around her with an unbreakable strength. "We face it together. That is what a family does." A soft, hesitant rustle came from the narrow hallway behind Eleanor. 4-year-old Chloe stepped slowly into the dim light, clutching her favorite worn-out stuffed rabbit, her big, expressive eyes blinking up at Nathaniel with pure, innocent wonder. "Mr. Quiet Man, did you come to see us?" the little girl asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. Nathaniel dropped immediately to one knee, opening his arms wide as a fresh wave of tears tracked down his rugged cheeks. "I came because I missed you both more than words can say, Chloe," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. The little girl didn't hesitate for a single second. She ran forward, throwing her small arms around Nathaniel's neck and burying her face in his shoulder. "Can you stay here with us forever?" Chloe asked innocently, her tiny voice muffled against his coat. "Can you be my daddy?" The small apartment fell into an absolute sacred hush. Eleanor froze in place, her hand flying to her mouth as her breath hitched, her heart stopping entirely at the weight of the child's devastatingly simple question. Nathaniel closed his eyes tightly, feeling the profound, irrevocable shifting of his entire universe as he held the little girl closer than he had ever held anything in his life. He looked up, locking eyes with Eleanor across the small room, seeing all the fear, doubt, and hesitation melt away, replaced by the unmistakable, golden glow of a love that had defied every social barrier imaginable. "I would be honored beyond words," Nathaniel whispered, his voice steady and resolute as he looked back down at the little girl, "to be your dad, forever and always." Eleanor dropped to her knees beside them, wrapping her arms around both of them as the three bodies melted into a single, unbreakable embrace within the modest walls of the cramped Queen's apartment, the safest, warmest, and most complete place Nathaniel Foster had ever known. The formal corporate fallout was swift, messy, and uncompromising, precisely as Enrique had predicted, but it lacked the outcome his brother had feared. Standing his ground with unyielding resolve, Nathaniel formally stepped down as a president of the family's hotel empire, voluntarily trading away his corner office, his executive title, and his multi-million-dollar corporate dividends in exchange for a clean financial settlement and his absolute uncompromised freedom. Enrique had watched in stunned silence during the final notarized sign-off, staring at his younger brother as if he had lost his mind, entirely unable to comprehend how a man could willingly walk away from supreme wealth for the sake of a domestic worker and her child. But as Nathaniel walked out of the corporate glass tower for the final time and slid behind the wheel of his car to drive back to Queens, he didn't feel a single ounce of regret. Instead, for the first time in 42 years, his chest felt entirely light, unburdened by the heavy chains of familial obligation and suffocating expectations. By the following spring, the transformation of their daily lives was complete, settling into a rhythm of profound, ordinary domestic happiness that neither Nathaniel nor Eleanor could have ever scripted in their wildest dreams. In the quiet, sunlit kitchen of a cozy, modest townhouse they had recently purchased together in a leafy suburban neighborhood just outside the city, the air was filled with the rich, comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toasted cinnamon bread. Chloe, now a year older and fiercely independent, sat at the wooden breakfast island, aggressively coloring in a new sketchbook with bright purple and yellow markers while chattering happily about her upcoming school field trip. Eleanor stood by the stove, humming softly to herself as she flipped pancakes on the griddle, her hair falling in soft, natural waves around her shoulders, her face glowing with a peaceful radiance born of genuine security and deep, abiding love. Nathaniel sat across from Chloe at the breakfast table, wearing a comfortable flannel shirt instead of his usual tailored Italian suit, a pair of modern, sleek digital hearing aids resting comfortably in his ears, capturing every single delighted giggle, every clatter of silverware, and every whispered word of affection in the room. He reached across the smooth wooden surface, his fingers brushing gently against Eleanor's hand as she walked by to set a fresh plate of food between them. She paused for a moment, looking down at him with a tender, knowing smile, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss against his cheek before returning to her cooking. Nathaniel looked around the bright, sun-drenched kitchen, taking in the harmless clutter of children's toys in the corner, the colorful refrigerator covered in artistic masterpieces, and the warm, vibrant life pulsing through every square foot of their shared home. For the first time in his entire life, the heavy, echoing silence that had haunted his childhood was gone forever, replaced by the rich, beautiful symphonic reality of a family, his family, and he knew, with every fiber of his being, that he had finally found where he truly belonged.